It is difficult, and yet far from impossible, to picture the world that Austen Channing Brown describes in her book. For many of us, our lives are easy if sprinkled with some frustrating challenges. But for others, we know that there are people who see us as nothing but stereotypes and would rather the status quo remain than step out of their comfort zones. This book, written by a black woman whose name was chosen in part so that others would assume she was a white man, illustrates how deeply injustices bury into themselves the infrastructure of America. For someone who grew up in predominantly white communities, Brown had to learn to love her blackness. Sharing experiences from school, church, work, and beyond, you will find yourself feeling the anger and hopelessness that the author herself felt. However, will you feel the same urge to fight for change, even if it never comes? I'm Still Here forces us to confront our privilege and encourages us to amplify the voices that must be heard. In any and every society, children are sacred. They represent an untainted future that we all hope will shine bright. But when you're black, you learn very early on that you're different. Worse, you are other. In America, where white people both are dominant and dominate, you are forced into accepting and integrating into white culture. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean that you are safe. It is still possible, even likely, that you will be judged through the lenses of endless stereotypes. You'll learn not to act suspiciously, to give no one the excuse to accuse you of anything. It doesn't matter at all that you're a kid. You too have to be careful, solely because of your skin. Entrenched in a world like that, it can be difficult to love the body and the culture that you're born into. This is especially true if you spend most of your time surrounded by white people, whether in school or church. You have to learn about your own community and learn to love it in turn. It is a journey that the author goes through, as do many others. When you're a minority, you are forced to become a spokesperson for your race, your community, your people. This can happen anytime and anywhere. It is also a very difficult spot to be put into, for many reasons. For one thing, it is highly unlikely that you are ready to fill this position. After all, who would be? The circumstance may come up out of the blue and you'll have to think on your feet with everyone expecting enlightened answers. Who are you to be the representative of your race? While explaining and defending your community, you will also be faced with the insecurities of not being the right person for the job. Your opinion may affect what others think about your entire race, after all. This fact is also something that will grate on you. Diversity exists not only between races but within them too. Not every black person thinks or acts the same way as others. But will the people who are waiting for an answer realize this? Being white doesn't just mean that you're part of the majority. It also means that nearly everything in society is geared toward you. Not only do you get to see yourself reflected in the media, but also subtly in the conversations that surround you. In the book, Brown shares about a disconnect that she feels with her peers in a majority white school. Teachers use examples and analogies that she doesn't understand at all and no one takes the time to explain them. She has to pretend to understand too or risk looking bad. This rarely happens the other way around because black teachers are so few and in between. It is hard to escape the fact that whiteness comes with privilege. Once you're used to having it, any loss of power becomes unimaginable and oppressive, so much so that you might be willing to do anything to regain that perceived sense of lost freedom. Being white doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad person, but it does put you in a position where you're elevated above many others. And that can easily make you oppressive of those who are truly suppressed. The primary issue when fighting for change and progress is the perceptions of other people, of those who look at your efforts and don't understand. Some people think that things are better than they were and you should be grateful. After all, segregation is no longer a reality and black people can vote. Some people think that for there to be equality, someone has to be the underdog. This may be true because this is what people have become used to. However, the fact of the matter stands that there should always have been equal human rights regardless of race. That just because black people aren't slaves anymore doesn't mean that the system is fair. America has come a long way from the days chattel slavery, but white people still expect that they are praised for being and doing better than those who have come before them. Yet, in the slow process of black people regaining personhood, there have been white people who resist every small step gained by the black community. What seems to escape most people is that the slavery of black people was intentional. Even after all the pieces of progress in America's history, oppression and racism are still baked into the very foundations of the country's infrastructure. They persist to this day. Part of this may be caused by the lingering sentiment that black people aren't human. Just a few generations ago, they were nothing more than slaves, a workforce to be used and abused as one liked. All of this didn't happen all that long ago, either. There are still people who are alive now who clearly remember what it's like under Jim Crow, who have stories passed down about life as slaves. It is a history that weighs heavily on the descendants of those who suffered the most. Despite what white people may think, equality has yet to be achieved. Not when the mass incarceration of black people exists, the ghettos and impoverished inner-city neighborhoods, the practice of stop and frisk, racial profiling, and more. To some, racism may have evolved. And yet, there are still attacks on black people, bombings and shootings, even in sanctified spaces such as churches. The perceived loss of power, however slight, is capable of pushing white people to drastic measures against those who they barely see as people. As humans, we crave optimism and positivity so that we can feel better about things now. Unfortunately, this hope can be exhausting. Sometimes, it just isn't there to be found. Positivity can be deceitful. It can lull you into a sense of security, of settling for what you have now. As Brown writes, there was surely a time when slavery was still pervasive, that a black person could see nothing but a life of slavery in the past and the future. Where would that person find hope? Yet, they still resist and fight. It is challenging to be hopeful when faced with microaggressions. When there are hints peppered throughout your life that there are those who think of you as less than human and undeserving of your rights. What kind of environment is that for the growth of hope? It is more likely for hope to have died. But from that death can be produced a fire that can fuel the fight for a brighter tomorrow.